And so one of the things I want to tell you all, well, there's more than one of the things. There's a lot of things I want to tell you all, but I think this is definitely going to be an interactive session. So please be ready on your keyboards to share your thoughts. And Brittany and I will read those comments and share those. So a little bit about me. I'm from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, 954, Broward County, Florida stand up. If you're looking for the realest, now you know where they're at. And I grew up doing coalition work at the age of 13, started doing coalition work and representing the Broward Youth Coalition, where we consistently for over 25 years have cultivated leaders. Again, if you want to know what a real is, that's where we're at. So shout out to Miami-Dade, who's been doing the same thing. I digress. So been doing coalition work for a long time. And so for me, when I think about our work, when we think about substance use, misuse prevention strategies, I've been doing that for a while, but when I think about it from an equity standpoint, it's what I went to school for. This is what I studied. And the biggest hurdle that I have in this work and doing this work, when we think about inequities, when we think about injustice, is that defensiveness. So typically as a trainer shouldn't put a video on that's almost 20 minutes, but it's so good because it really speaks to what I've confronted the last decade in this work, that defensiveness. Because if I were to admit, people are thinking, if I were to admit this, that means that I'm a bad person. And that's not what we're saying. Like, I'm not saying you're a bad person. What we're saying is, all right, there's some things we all need to work on. And we all know that. If you got siblings, they tell you that all the time. If you got a partner, they'll tell you. And I think that's how we have to show up. And I say things all the time that are offensive, that are inappropriate. And I don't know if I've gotten better at not saying those things or trying to share things in a way that's more clearly articulated, but I have gotten better at apologizing. I have gotten better sitting with the feedback someone is telling me and processing that and trying to figure out how do I show up differently from after the feedback. So I think that video just helps us think about it. So we're not good people, let's be goodish. And goodish allows us to make mistakes. I see some feedback about the video. If you have any comments or any statements about the video, please put it in the chat box, and then we'll talk about those. So I'm going to share my slides now. I'm going to be asking questions. So, so be ready. What does this picture mean to you all, right? For some of you, this might be your first time seeing this. For others, this is like you've seen it everywhere. You're even tired of seeing it. What are we seeing here? What are we seeing here? All right, the only situation without a barrier is justice. The obstructions or barriers we sometimes place in society and culture. Y'all are funny even behind the beard. What are we seeing here? Justice equals no barriers. I like that. Equity is good. Justice is better. The playing field is not always equal, but we can make it better. The last one is liberation. The thing we can kind of think about this is that there is a progression, right? And so as we think about uh, the things that show up in our society, what what does it really look like? Where do we want it to be and go, and what's the ideal, right? And so when we think about reality, and then we think about equality, like our nation is founded on the idea of equality, and then we think about, well, after so many years, we find that equality isn't necessarily going to work for everybody. So maybe we need equity, right? And a lot of people are talking about equity. But however, that may not necessarily do it, and maybe we need to do justice. And I just want to point out that as as we live and grow as a society, we're always going to imagine what inclusion, what equity, what belonging looks. We're always going to reimagine what those things are. Is just I want to make sure you all are part of those conversations. And being a goodish person allows you to stretch, allows you to make mistakes and experiment on what you can do. We can move to justice, but first we have to be made aware of the systems and injustice and let go of that defensiveness. There we go. I love it. I love it. There are still fringes. They are not in the stands. As I'm saying, right? We're always going to reimagine them, and that's what we want, and that's what we want. I think that's the best. I think that's the best of us when we are imagining what inclusion, what belonging, what fairness looks like. So, what does the research say? We know when we think about racial discrimination that it is recognized and it's a significant source for stress. We know that mounting evidence, overwhelming evidence, show that racial discrimination is linked to negative mental and physical health outcomes. Okay, studies show that when we look at college students at predominantly white institutions, that racial ethnic microaggressions, which are small slights that are to someone's race or ethnicity. So it may be that Colbert, like, you're really articulate, and it's sort of like that's be considered a microaggression because it's a surprise when a Black person is articulate, right? So microaggressions are those little slights and stressors, and we know that college students of color, because of the microaggressions they experience, lead to higher risk of anxiety. And we see that higher risk of anxiety and in consequences when we think about alcohol use and binge drinking. So we know that when racial discrimination increases stress, and that stress can then look and show up as using substances. In the chat box, what is stress? What is stress? We got some more things in the chat box. The challenge is Justice Equity, a group, has to give up power. Historically, no group has given up power. Power is usually taken. The people of color are not ready to take power. Like, so we have life, we have mental and physical reaction. What is stress? Megan's like, just all of it. All of this is stressful. What is stress? She said, yep. Triggers. What is stress? We have a physical reaction to exterior things. Stress is a feeling of emotional and physical tension, unbalance, everyday situation, any type of pressure, strain on an individual, a overwhelming feeling, right? So we know that is an external stimuli, right? That causes pressure in your body, mentally or physically, has to respond to that type of pressure. Not all stress is bad, not all stress is good, but it's definitely an external stimuli. So what's interesting nowadays that a lot of people are talking about mental health, and I feel like a lot of definitions are being thrown out, a lot of definitions are being in somewhat conflated, and so when people say that there's a difference between stress and there's a difference between trauma. So what's trauma? In your mind, what is trauma? Somebody sent to me things that we don't have control of when it comes to stress. So what is trauma? And how is trauma different from stress? If at all, if they're the same. I feel like someone is now Googling and gonna put the definition in the chat box. An emotional response to something terrible in your life, experiencing extreme duress, either mentally and physically. Trauma is something that changes and interferes your life. A scary situation that have no power, little power to change. Trauma doesn't feel good, hard to control. Trauma is harder to recover from. Yes, yes, yes. Good, good, good. And so there are several definitions when we think about trauma. And I think when we think about it in for our purposes, it's stress that is acute and it is resulting from an event or a series of events that overwhelm someone's typical coping mechanisms. So a traumatic situation really overwhelms what you have in your toolbox to deal with stressful things, and it leaves a wound, it leaves a scar. It's something that it reminds you of when time passes, it reminds you of that situation, right? And so it's a level of stress that causes a reaction that feels so overwhelmed, and it's lasting. And so I just want to make those things different. And what we're doing is we're going to be talking about particularly stress. Now, can stress look like racial discrimination? Can it look like trauma? That's what we're getting into now. What is racial discrimination? What is racial discrimination? I told y'all this is interactive. I could sit here and tell you all the definitions, but I think definitely you all talking and sharing really gives you an idea of what other people are thinking about. So what is racial discrimination? Treating people differently because of skin color. Good job, good job. Treating and believing someone is different from you less than based on skin color. Very good. Yes, that. Ignorance, hate. Those are really good. Bias against a specific skin tone. Assumptions, generalizations, bias. Good, 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 good. So we'll look at, so when we think about racism, it's prejudice plus power, prejudice plus power. And so what that means is that I may be prejudiced to a certain group and I have the social power to enact and or do something to that specific group. We also have to remember that race is a social construct. What does that mean, Colbert, a social construct? That means that race was created. It's a social system. So when we look at before, but also definitely into the slave trade, you can see that leaders, colonial leaders, coming up with race as a way to create a caste system to separate the haves and have-nots, right? And so the easiest way they could do that is by saying, all right, if you're black, you're this. If you're Asian, you're this. And you're white, you're this, right? And so there is a social construct. They created race and racism in order to influence whatever they want to get, right? And so when we look at racism, it's prejudice plus social power. Now, can people of color be racist? That's debatable and arguable. In my humble opinion, I don't really think so, because they don't necessarily have the power to change your life, have the power to hold you back from what you need to do if you're a white person. Now, can a person of color be prejudiced? Yes, but racism, it's prejudice plus power. And so when we look at racial discrimination, it's a manifest in people of color being denied access to resources, opportunities, and the power and agency to define reality. So the people of color being denied access to resources, opportunities, and the power and agency to define reality. Hands down, what I love about CACA, what I love about the coalition model is that we're giving at its basics, we believe that communities can solve their own problems. That is agency. And we're saying that a community, all they need is training, skills development, because they have what it takes to change their community. And when we look at community public health, people having the agency and the power to influence the reality to improve their health. And so racial discrimination is saying no to that, right? We're saying that we're not going to give you, we're going to deny you access to resources. We're going to deny you access to opportunities and having the agency to define your own reality. So if community public health is based on people's agency to improve their health, but racial discrimination is taking that away from them, then can they really be healthy communities? And so what are the types of racial discrimination? And so so these things can get very convoluted, very complicated, and you can talk about all the systems and all the things which are helpful. But as coalition and communities, they're like, what do I need to do? What did Colbert tell me what I need to do? How are we going to make this happen? Because I'm trying to change this, right? And so when we look at the different types of racial discrimination, one is avoidance, wherein people reject and or ignore you because of your race. So a type of racial discrimination is saying that, all right, because you look like this, because you are this, you're going to be rejected and or ignored. Hostility, wherein verbal and nonverbal acts are directed at people to demean, intimidate, or communicate inferior status to them because of their race. So hostility is a type of racial discrimination where we're saying and or not saying that you are less than, and that I am going to communicate to you in multiple ways that you are inferior to who I am, right? And adverse hostility. And adverse hostility is where we encounter barriers and in forms of lack of opportunity or a hostile environment. When we think about vulnerable communities, and these could be economically disadvantaged communities, like there's a lack of opportunity, right? And it'd be so clear, right? There's one area that's socially and economically disadvantaged, and across the street, across this train track, across the highway, there's this other community that has a lot more opportunities, right? And so that is a clear indication that there is a difference. And so when we think about racial discrimination, they show up in these three ways: avoidance, hostility, adverse, and hostility. Going back to our picture, we're going back to the chat box. Describe the different types of racial discrimination in this picture. Avoidance, hostility, adverse hostility. We're practicing. Describe racial discrimination in this picture. And feel free to tell me, Colbert, you need to slow down. You know, I'm writing stuff down, so you can definitely I cannot see the picture. It is so large that it won't fit in my screen. All right, let me do this way then. Do it this way. That's better. All right, why are they not sitting in the bleachers? Now, is that avoidance, hostility, or adverse hostility? When we look at the different types, what type is it? Aversive, okay. Aversive hostility. And we see anything else? Remember, there's four different situations. What do we see? What do we see? Avoidance. It could be all three, someone said. All right. Now, what I want y'all to do is name which one or explain what is avoidance, what's hostility, and what's adverse hostility. Is the reality avoidance, or is it hostility, or is it adverse hostility, or is it a particular thing in the picture that's a certain type? We came here to do. I feel like reality is avoidance. Okay. Good. And we're saying that reality is avoidance because avoidance is wherein people are rejected or ignored because of their race, right? This person is definitely being rejected and ignored because nobody's paying attention. Okay. We're where we are today because of all three. So I could say reality has all three. Okay. Definitely. Right. Hostility and reality, the child end up being pushed deep into the ground while others are lifted to see and put far above the individual, possibly based on race or age or race. Good job, Yolanda. Thank you. The fence is bare, so that seems to be adverse hostility, right? And so when we look at racial discrimination, it's not only for the individual, but it also from our institutions. So what's happening, the types of institutions, the social institutions or the public institutions in our communities, but also when we think about the overall environment, are those things working together to keep people out or to keep people for opportunities? So when we think about laws, when we think about the way we deal with people who use substances, like who's being hurt, who's being ignored. Good. I feel like some people are still typing. I'm going to give you a minute. because I can't move forward until y'all get this piece.
Megan said that all three are being ignored in one form or another.
Okay, okay. All right, I'll give y'all 30 more seconds if anybody's gonna write anything else. FYI, Brittany, I'm gonna ask you to cue music in a little bit. I think people telling it's telling that the people standing figured out how all is. Okay, I think that was a message for me. All right. So our next point here. I look at the people in the bleachers are avoiding the people outside of the fence. Oh, that's great. Good job. Right, because they're having a good old time and not thinking about, and that goes like into what we're saying. So every year, at mid-year, I do something on implicit bias. And so that's a part of it, right? So the people, you have a whole stadium of people not paying attention to, right? Because they don't know to, or they've been socialized to think so. So we have an assignment that I'm gonna have y'all work on, and that you all are gonna share some feedback. I did that before the slide. Hold on. It's a slide. There it is. Boom. So we have an assignment for you. All right. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna give y'all the worksheet. In the worksheet, I'm gonna show the worksheet now. Brittany's on it. Is racial discrimination identification and mitigation worksheet. Like you gotta y'all CACA, we want to give you everything you need to be successful. All right. That's what we're here to do. This is what we do. All right. So when we look at the different types of racial discrimination, what I would like for you all to do, and I'm going to give you all about 10 minutes to do this, is write down anything that's happened, a situation, incident, or a condition in your community that was avoidance, right? That you thought it was a racial discrimination and it fell in avoidance, or it was racial discrimination and it fell in hostility, or if it was adverse hostility. Name a community situation, incident, and or a condition, right? And then what are some techniques or tasks to mitigate this racial discrimination, right? So what are some things you naming that situation, and what are some things moving forward you all can do to mitigate some of that and or tasks? And it's not about having the right answers, because we can go in circles about that, and that's fine. And you need to kind of talk about what are the right answers for your community. But I think very much thinking about what has happened and also thinking about what it could have been done is essential when we think about being goodish. All right. So Brittany just put that in the chat box, and also to give you all some help. And Brittany, I'm going to ask you to cue music in a little bit.
Yep.
To give you all some help, we're going to give you all a toolkit that we use at CACA. I'm looking for the toolkit. It's
I
coming.
just put it in the chat box.
Oh, you're so fast. I'm like kicking through all the windows. I got they got things popping up. All right, so I'm going to give you all about 10 minutes. Work on the worksheet, and then you can use the toolkit to assist and think about techniques, tasks, and then that toolkit has strategies as well. So 10 minutes. Cue music. Love it. Thank you, Brittany. Thank you, thank you, thank you. She's all over it. She's all over it. So what are our thoughts? Yolanda placed a great question. So share what are some of the things you took from the toolkit, what you took from the worksheet, any aha moments, and or like, well, I already knew this, but it was good to be able to write it in this way. So share your thoughts about the worksheet and the toolkit. So Yolanda wrote, within my rural community, my coalition is struggling greatly in helping our members and leadership to recognize that there is diversity within a predominantly white community and that there are a number of equity issues that affect those living in rural communities and people of color. We have tried many avenues and different talks, justice framing, etc. Do you have any tips to begin to change these perspectives? I had a professor of mine that once told me that people are only going to see what they're ready to handle. People are only going to see the things that they're ready to handle. And this is a tough topic, right? This is a tough topic because we're saying to people, well, all of us have biases, and that we thought things are fair, but they're not really fair, right? That's a mind shift for a lot of people because we believe in meritocracy. We believe in all of these things. And when we say to people that the way we see the world in that way may not necessarily be all the way right, it just may take some people to come around. And so it's just continuing educating and creating opportunities to think about the different forms of diversity, because there's diversity of thought, there's diversity of religion, there's diversity when we're thinking about ability, physical diversity, neurodiversity. And so people talk about that in all white communities or predominantly white communities, there isn't much diversity. Yeah, there is. It's not as apparent when you think about race, ethnicity, but when we think about ability, we know that it is clear because of the pandemic, people who are differently abled are having a hard time living day to day because a lot of the social programs that we had for them, we cut because of the pandemic, right? And so that when we think about ability, when physical and also neurodiversity, those things exist, right? My background is education. And so when we think about people who are diagnosed with different different disabilities and or like when we think about ADHD or learning disabilities and those things, we know that males of color are being overdiagnosed. But we also know people who are being underdiagnosed are white girls. So there's a population of white young girls who are not necessarily being assisted from an academic standpoint, education standpoint, because we're not diagnosing them. And so that's different forms of diversity. And when we even think about politics, I mean, I think that's one of the things that coalitions are such a great place to, is like, how do we talk across the line? The pandemic has also been a mass disabling event. It is the only minority group that can enter at a time. It is the only minority group you can enter at any time. Right. Yeah. being differently abled. Anything else? What are our thoughts from like we gave you that fire. You got that worksheet. You can bring that worksheet to your coalition. That worksheet is a series in itself as a of coalition meetings. You're welcome. You're welcome. And then you have the toolkit, right? And the toolkit you can take a look at and use it in your logic models. And I'm not saying that it's the best thing in the world, but like y'all got tools to make this thing happen. Who we have? It's difficult to help foster those shifts. We'll continue to have these conversations. Hopefully we'll be able to build a stronger and understand. Yeah, it's just, we got to continue having that conversation. We got to continue having that conversation. This worksheet was great and difficult to fill in with steps rather than giant leaps of mitigation. I liked how it made me think a little more deeper. Right, because if you all been through the training, and Alex, I don't know if he's still here, like we're about specifics. What can we do? What are specific strategies and their tasks we can implement, measure, right? Because we got to know if it's working, and then going from there. And what I propose is that you can definitely use that worksheet and a toolkit as a learning opportunity for people, and creating a series of trainings and or conversations and to have with your coalition members and your community members on what does this look like? What could we do? And I think depending on who your different sectors, they're going to see that worksheet and think about that worksheet differently. And when we think about social determinants of health, and social indicators of how people, how healthy they are, you're going to see some of those things show up, especially when we think about giving that to our sectors and working with our sectors. And I think my final point that I want to make is when we think about racial discrimination, what makes it so difficult, one, to measure, but also two, to really pin down, is that it really varies person to person, right? When we think about the frequency that someone experiences racial discrimination, there are some people who experience zero to little racial discrimination. And there are people on the other side of the spectrum where they're experiencing every single day. And so I think there's a continuum of experiences that you all have to take account, to say that you may talk to a person of color and they say, well, nah, not really something that I seen or experienced. That's that person's experience, right? But if you meet somebody else and they feel like it's happening every day, then again, how do you think about those things, and what tasks and or strategies you can use to mitigate some of that? So I'm not going to be the one to hold you. Some of you all might be working on the worksheet still. Some of you all. And so when we think about additional assistance, when we think about how can you continue those conversations, there's an organization that's called CADCA that can help. And so there are definitely web-based and printed resources. We have a cultural competence primer you all can download off the website and take a look at that. And because there's tons of resources, and it's even more resources if you are a CADCA member or you're connected to coalition leaders across the country and also internationally. If you all are experiencing any issues within your coalition and want to talk to somebody, feel free to reach out to Coalition Development Support, which is 1-800-54-CATCA, extension 240. Tell them I sent you, and they'll give you great service. They'll give you great service either way. They actually may not give you good service if you say I sent you. So feel free to reach out to them. Conferences, like Brittany's talked about, there is the conference when we talk about mid-year, and it's in Orlando. It's in Orlando, y'all. Bring everybody. Bring your mom, dad, auntie, nephews, cousins. And enjoy the conference. And there are webinars like you all are signed up here, and then trainings. We also do customized training and services. And so depending on what your coalition needs, what your community needs, we can tailor our work and material to fit those needs. See if I see any chat box. And stay in touch and connected. You can reach us on different social media platforms, and also I'll put my email in here. Reach out to me and Brittany if you all need anything regarding this work, but also moving forward to help strengthen what you're doing in your communities and your coalition. That's all I have for you all. Thank you for being here. If you have any questions, I'll stay on here for a bit to see if anybody has any questions, and then we'll go from there. Brittany just put the evaluation. You're on my side, so I'm going to point to you. There it is. So please do the evaluation. Let me know if this was helpful. If there's anything else you would like to see, we cover a lot of material pretty quickly. So just let us know. Brittany?
Thank you so much, Colbert. So I put, as you were mentioning all of those different things, I put a bunch of different links in the chat box. So there's a link to the page where you can get more information about mid-year, how to register. The session calendar should be coming out sometime in May. So take a look for that to see all the different sessions we'll be offering.
It's in the survey. The survey is not working.
The survey is not working. Okay. Let me message our evaluation person and make sure that it is. And while I'm doing that, so I also put a link in there for where you can book individual one-to-ones with our coalition development support team as well. And they are, you can do an hour booking with them and just sit and talk about coalition issues that you've got that you're trying to solve. And that's a great resource as well. So, and the other link that I put in there is, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, our May webinar is with Gia and the Truth Initiative. And so we don't have the registration for that link out yet, but you can sign up for Gia's newsletter and be notified when registration does open up for that email. Let me try. Oh, I just got a new link. So let me try this one really quickly. Let's see if that one works. Cool, it's all working. All right, excellent. I don't see any other questions in the chat box coming through. So I think this is a good place to end. And then, like Colbert said, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to him, and we'll be posting the recordings and things on the website in the next couple of days. All right, have a wonderful day, everyone. We'll see you in May.